want to take up too much of your time here. So I just had a couple small questions I wanted to
Sure.
ask. Uh, what are your thoughts on Antifa nowadays? There are some people who look and say, hey, like Chomsky, for instance, who you mentioned earlier, and he was on the podcast a while back, says that he thinks that Antifa is a gift to the far right because you're engaging in his words, if you push things into the realm of violence, then the people who are better armed and more vicious are going to be the ones that win, and that's probably not people on the left. Do you have any thoughts, reactions to that, or what do you think?
Well, I don't quite agree with Chomsky, who I think is a genius, so I would take his opinion over mine. But no, I don't quite agree, and I'll tell you why. I think Antifa is not a gift to the right. Antifa is an invention of the right. And I think that the people I know who identify with Antifa, in Chicago, for example, are really good people. And well, I I was I'll tell you a quick story and then come back to this. But I was a peace marshal at the NATO demonstrations a few years ago. Bernadine, myself, our friend Vijay Prashad, we were kind of supposed to be like marshals, but they called them peace guides, I think is what we were called. And we were supposed to be kind of monitoring, guarding Jesse Jackson and his crew, which we were kind of, but we're old, and what are we going to do, really? But so we were kind of part of the infrastructure. And right up ahead of us was a group that called themselves anarchists, and they were dressed in black. And Vijay and Bernadine and I kept drifting toward them and leaving our post because we loved what they loved. We loved their chants. We loved who they were. We loved their attitude. It was kind of uh, bring it all down. I can't remember their exact chant, but everything's fucked up was something that, then, and I agree with that. So anyway, I'm the people I know in Chicago I'm drawn to, and Chomsky himself is an anarchist, and I'm an anarcho-communist, and so I'm drawn to the anarchist spirit. I think Antifa has been invented in this sense that if you listen to the right-wing commentators on Fox or in the Republican House of Representatives, they always say, well, what do you think of Black Lives Matter Antifa? There's no such thing. That's an invention. That's a creation to make something scary happen. Uh, when I've been in meetings, I've often been in meetings with kids who identify as Antifa, and I've been in conversations with them. And in those conversations, I'm happy to be critical and to be in struggle.
Right.
But I'm not happy to be critical of them outside of being with them.
I,
It's like Occupy. When Occupy happened, a lot of my left liberal and even radical friends were like, "Oh, what's their goal? What do they think they're going to do? Are they going to overthrow Wall Street?" Get over yourself. I mean, and people began giving them advice. You should dress better. You should be more articulate. Fuck you. I mean, that's as articulate as I can get. And if you have a critique of Occupy, go down, get online, speak in the public microphone. In other words, you can't stand aside from it and make this criticism. I think that in the main, the actions of the anarchists since the George Floyd, you know, moment episode have been mostly good, and
yep.
they've been mostly portrayed as evil, and I don't buy it. This guy who was assassinated in Oregon, I mean in Washington, he had apparently killed someone in a white guy had killed somebody in the demonstrations in Portland. Do you remember this? And
Yeah.
there was a government assassination of him. William Barr said, "Good, he's off the street." That he was taken out. He wasn't armed at that point. They just took him out. And to me, he had stood up and defended a black person who was going to be shot by a white, mobster. And I think he should be honored. I don't think we should spend our time beating up on a guy like that or people like that. So I have a complicated feeling, but I often feel that Like people often ask me, what are you critical about in terms of the Weather Underground? And I'm critical of a lot, and some of it I can speak about generally. But what I also tend to think is the New York Times or MSNBC is not the place that I'm going to do a self-criticism, because those aren't my people.
Yeah, of
You
course.
know, I'll do criticism, self-criticism. I'll do dialogue and critique with my people.
Yeah.
And so when I have been asked to come to Antifa meetings and talk with them, I'm happy to say what I always say publicly, which is the way you judge an action, the way you judge your activities is not by how good you looked on TV or how cool you were with the Molotov cocktail in your hand. The way you judge it is a pedagogical standard. Did you teach and did you learn? If you taught and you learned, then we're on the same page. If all you did was perform, I'm not that interested.
Yeah.
I don't really think that goes anywhere. That's the distinction also I'm making, Duncan, between an activist and an organizer. All organizers are activists, but not all activists are organizers. I want to persuade my comrades who are anarchists and Antifa that they ought to be organizers, and that means their actions have to serve an organizer's purpose.
I see. Yeah, and there's a lot of false equivalency between smashing windows and say what happened on January 6th at the Capitol.
Oh, I mean, it's night and day. It's like you can't take a tactic and elevate it to a principle. I mean, there are insurrections you and I approve of. I mean, we approve of the Haitian Revolution. We approve of the insurrection, the American insurrection against the British. We approve of those. And then there are insurrections we don't approve of. Jefferson Davis, Hitler, Mussolini,
Yeah.
and January 6th. Those are insurrections that are meant for the rise of white supremacy, the rise of power. And the insurrections we approve of, like the Haitian Revolution, those are insurrections for popular power. So I'm for those. And I won't reduce any of my critique to a tactic. There are tactics and there are tactics. So even the thing about, and Noam Chomsky knows this, I know he knows it, but even the discussions we have in this country about violence are so superficial. We are living in a sewer of violence. In fact, we ought to take yellow police tape and tape it around the entire border of the United States. This is a crime scene, and we are living in a sewer of violence. And for people to stand up and try to stop the violence, sometimes carrying a weapon of some kind, that's on the right side, and it kind of reminds me, I posted something recently about Israel has a right to defend itself. Yeah, and the Germans literally said, the Nazis said, we have a right to defend ourselves in the Warsaw Ghetto. They literally said that, and the planters in Virginia had a right to defend themselves against Nat Turner. It all turns everything upside down. Don't get stuck at a tactical discussion when what we ought to be talking about is politics and principles.
I,